Hi, my name is James. This is James Loves Games. It's been a while, folks. I'm glad to be back. Thank you again for sticking with me. 2022 was a big year for James Loves Games. I played a ton of games, 30 to be exact. Some of them I absolutely loved. They were some of the best games I've ever played. Some of them I wish I could erase from my memory so that they would haunt me no longer. Some of you are going to find out really quickly that you're not going to agree with this list. But these are every single game I played in 2022, ranked from number 30 to number 1. Let's go. Number 30, the worst game I played in 2022, an absolute stinker that I hated, Final Fantasy VII Remake. As a super fan of the original game, I had well-deserved astronomically high expectations for Final Fantasy VII Remake and was incredibly disappointed in the lukewarm, not nearly as good as the original soundtrack, the half-in-the-bag, not quite classic turn-based, not quite full-blown Devil May Cry style combat system that didn't quite scratch either itch, and most egregious of all, the cringe-inducing, one-dimensional, mind-numbingly bad character dialogue, and voice performances with all the subtlety and nuance of the cast of Scooby-Doo, who apparently supplied the voice of Don Corneo. By the time I called it quits, for the third time, I was praying for Sephiroth to just hurry up and summon Meteor already and put us all out of our misery. But, in all fairness, it was very pretty. Number 29, Cursed to Golf. Cursed to Golf was so forgettable, I didn't even remember I had played it until I started doing research on all the games I had streamed in 2022. It's a horror-themed indie golf roguelike, which one would think would be enough to leave some kind of impact in my brain, but alas, much like the protagonist, Cursed to Golf is DOA with nobody to mourn it. The gameplay was a new spin on an old classic, sort of like golf meets Peggle meets deck-building roguelike. But after 10 minutes of playtime, you will have done pretty much all there is to do in the game. The only thing that changes as you continue playing is that it gets more frustrating, which is why after only playing for about 2 hours, I put this one on the shelf. Almost fell out of my chair. Number 28, Famicom Detective Club, the girl who stands behind. Nobody capitalizes on nostalgia better than Nintendo, but this is the first time I'd ever heard of them trying this tactic by remaking a game that nobody has ever heard of. The premise of this visual novel, I just can't bring myself to call it a game, is already stretched to ridiculous proportions from the get-go, with a troubled 15-year-old youth being taken in by a private detective to follow in his footsteps covering a murder case. But throw in some high school ghost stories and some surprisingly sick beats.
Baby, you got a stew going.
That is, you would have a stew going if the gameplay didn't solely consist of grinding through the same conversational prompts over and over again until you magically stumble upon whatever contrived combination of choices the game requires for you to progress the story. This game leaves little for me to stand behind. Number 27, Rollerdrome. I wish I had just played the PS Plus Extra trial of Rollerdrome rather than spending $20 to buy it. That's my review of this game. The Tony Hawk's Pro Skater meets dystopian action shooter concept is cool and has a very charming visual style, but there just isn't much depth to this game. The gameplay loop is fun, but if you've played the game for 5 minutes, you've pretty much played the whole game. You just die more as you progress. There aren't very many different levels to play on, so the longevity of the game exists mostly within the player's desire to challenge themselves to get higher scores and play more difficult versions of the same thing over and over. I'm not really that kind of person, so it didn't really land with me. I honestly prefer Tony Hawk's Pro Skater because it has way more levels, way more charm, and way better music. Adding guns to this formula makes for an interesting twist, but Rollerdrome just doesn't really have anything else going on. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go see how to get a refund on a 5-month-old game from the PlayStation Store. Number 26, Mortal Shell. In the run-up to the release of Elden Ring, and after beating all of FromSoft's Souls games, I needed a temporary fix of that Souls-like gameplay loop. Mortal Shell was to be that fix, but much like a nicotine patch, it just left me unsatisfied, slightly nauseous, and still craving the real deal. Mortal Shell isn't really a bad game, because I think fans of the Souls genre would probably find a lot to like here, but it's like the generic store-brand version of a FromSoft game. The combat felt too heavy for my taste, to the point it seemed like playing with a large amount of input lag, and the noticeably janky frame rate certainly exacerbated this feeling. So, if you're jonesing for a fix of that sweet Souls formula and you've absolutely, positively exhausted all possible enjoyment from Elden Ring, and if you can find it for free, maybe give Mortal Shell a try? Or just scratch that idea and play Elden Ring again instead. Or Dark Souls. Or Demon Souls. Or Bloodborne. really any other Souls game. Number 25, Nioh. On paper, Nioh is a game I should have liked a lot more than I actually did. When it was first announced, I was smitten with the setting, the visual style, and the fact that you got to fight huge, wretched yokai bosses. But once I heard it compared to Dark Souls and other hard games, I gave it a pass because
this sort of thing ain't my bag, baby.
Well, after having beaten all of the Souls games and gotten over my fear of hard games, the thing keeping me from playing any more of Nioh is that it just isn't as good as Dark Souls, so why bother? Maybe saying the gameplay is worse than Dark Souls isn't really fair, but it is different, and not in a way that I like, although I can't quite put my finger on what it is. At the end of the day, Nioh just didn't have anything in it that made me want to keep playing. I'm still willing to give Nioh 2 a chance though, so maybe this year? Number 24, probably another controversial pick, Death Stranding, Director's Cut. In Death Stranding, you play as Sam Porter Bridges, a porter who builds bridges, so he can take packages from point A to point B. Provided, of course, that his bridge baby, BB, manages to warn Sam of the invisible space ghosts that want to suck him into their space ghost quicksand and turn him into a human nuclear bomb. Meanwhile, Deadman, Heartman, and most horrible of all, Die Hard Man, the rejected bosses from a long since scrapped Mega Man game, aid Sam in his quest. Now, the amount of pretentious nonsense I can stand in a game is directly proportional to how fun it is. And managing my ludicrously large backpack inventory so I don't fall into a river and watch my precious cargo drift away while the boxes I did manage to save get showered with acid rain is definitely not enough of a good time to negate the aforementioned weirdness for weirdness' sake. But hey, Norman Reedus was in The Walking Dead, so that's pretty cool, right? Number 23, Yakuza Like a Dragon. More like Yakuza Like a Movie. After roughly 2 hours of hard-boiled Yakuza cliches, the game finally cedes control to the player, and if you like the Yakuza series, this game is kind of a double-edged katana, which really wouldn't make much sense, so it's a very fitting analogy. The core of the game is classic Yakuza, navigating the seedy side of Tokyo, playing classic Namco arcade games, getting drunk at hostess bars, and of course singing karaoke. The classic Yakuza combat, however, has been swapped out for a classic JRPG system with turn-based battles a la Dragon Quest, the game's namesake. This change was actually the main draw for me, and while I did enjoy the fights, when the game would actually let me play, I was hoping for a more lighthearted, sillier Yakuza experience from the mainline games in the series, and this one was still a little more serious than I was led to believe it would be. Oh, and did I mention the too many cutscenes? Because there's too many cutscenes in this game. Number 22, Little Nightmares. Little Nightmares was a nice distraction during the Halloween season, and the gameplay lent itself well for streaming, but it was a fairly simple game with gameplay revolving around stealthily avoiding or evading large, scary fat people. The main impact from the game was its incredibly disturbing visual style and very depressing narrative of a child trying to escape from a cruise ship so as not to get eaten by the monstrous, morbidly obese passengers. It was very memorable in that regard, but altogether quite short, with the game lasting only about 3.5 hours. Still, there are worse ways to get into the Halloween spirit, and I'm told the sequel, Little Nightmares 2, is even better than the first. Although I've yet to find the time or the motivation to play that one just yet. Maybe next Halloween? Number 21, Dismantle. This one has been something of a sleeper hit in my household, and regulars of my channel won't recognize it because I never streamed it. My wife and I are huge fans of couch co-op games and are constantly lamenting the lack of them on modern systems. Dismantle fits the bill perfectly for its no-frills, escape the zombie-filled island story, the simple yet addictive gameplay loop of smash things to make better smashers to smash bigger things faster, and its easy in, easy out co-op functionality. I've also been pleasantly surprised by how massive the game world has turned out to be. While I do consider this a good choice for would-be co-opers, I wouldn't recommend it for someone looking for a good solo experience, as most of the fun, I think, is to be found from working together. Unless you really, really like smashing things with a crowbar, in which case, go nuts! Number 20, Witchwood. Witchwood is another game that probably slipped under JLG regulars' radar because I played all 12 hours or so of it exclusively with my oldest daughter off-stream. All of your tasks in Witchwood involve collecting various ingredients across several different biomes to combine them into items or objects that will then be combined with other items and ingredients to give to people to solve their problems, or open new areas. It's very simple, but it kept our attention the whole time and was a pretty fun way to spend a few lazy Sunday afternoons. I also really appreciated the game's dry wit and sense of humor in the dialogue. The story unfolds through narration and conversations between the witch protagonist and various characters throughout the world, and she is a very salty old witch indeed. While I did enjoy the game as an opportunity to bond with my daughter, and get a pretty easy platinum trophy along the way, I probably would have been disappointed had I spent money on it or just played it by myself. Most folks might find the game rather tedious, so if you're big into action or are looking for a challenge, it probably isn't for you. But for a low-stress way to veg out for half a day, it's not too bad, provided it's free or close to it. Number 19. Toem. Toem is like a black and white Swedish Pokemon Snap without the Pokemon, but all of the charm. Much like Witchwood, Toem was a PS Plus freebie that I played with my kids and really had much more fun playing than I thought I would. The gameplay is fairly basic. You talk to people, they ask you to take a picture of something, you go out and take a picture of the thing, you go back and show the picture. I'm terrible at explaining how fun this is, but it really is an adorably good time that had my whole family smiling. Even my youngest daughter, who was 5 at the time, was getting into it and had a blast making progress all on her own. So I'd highly recommend it to folks with younger kids to get them into gaming. Toem also has a fairly easy to get platinum trophy if you're into that sort of thing, as well as some free DLC areas that were released not too long ago. So check it out for a fun, family-friendly gaming time. Number 18. Shifu. I really like Shifu a lot, and the only reason I ranked it so low on this list is because I'm so incredibly bad at it. Very rarely does a game do something truly new and special these days, but Shifu's fighting system is unlike anything else I've ever played. The sheer variety and complexity of the moves you can do is absolutely stunning, and frankly, kind of overwhelming. But taking down a whole group of thugs makes you feel like a real kung fu master. At least, my perception of what that feels like from watching Jackie Chan movies growing up. Aside from my lack of skill, my only gripe about the game is the aging system, which essentially punishes you for being bad at it. Not a good combo for a scrub like me. Still, even with the decrease in health that comes with age, you also get boosted damage, so it isn't a total disadvantage. Again, provided you know what you're doing. I'd like to take the time to get good enough at Shifu to beat it, but I think it's going to take a lot of kung fu movie marathons to bring me the motivation to try again. Number 17. Visage. I really wanted to wow my audience with the scariest Halloween game ever last year, and every single scariest game ever list included Visage, and for good reason. I don't delve into hyper-scary gaming experiences like this very often, but I can easily crown Visage as the single scariest game I've ever played. And when I say scary, I mean every conceivable genre of scary. It has jump scares, creepy atmospheres, gore galore, psychological trauma, the whole shebang. Visage is really more of an action puzzle game at its core, and while I did become somewhat acclimated to the scares partway through the game, I'll be gosh darned if that crazy old bat Dolores isn't the single most terrifying game character I've ever come across. Does Visage push the boundaries with new and inventive horror game mechanics? Not really. Is it super duper ooper schmooper scary? Yes. Yes it is. Will I be playing it ever again? As soon as I saw the credits roll, I deleted it as fast as I could. Number 16. Control. Control was very highly recommended to me by many fine people in the stream chat. Thank you, chat. And with it being free on PS Plus, I really had no excuse not to play it. And I'm glad I did, although I probably won't ever go back and play it again. Control has a fairly straightforward gameplay loop of enter room, mind throw things at bad guys, shoot other bad guys, rinse, repeat. It was fun in its own way, but I reached a point fairly early on where it became apparent that certain abilities were way better than others, so my reasons for deviating from one fight strategy were non-existent. It was fun, but it became too repetitive. Story-wise, I couldn't tell you for any amount of money what the game was about. You just kind of show up at some shadowy government agency and tell everyone you're the new boss, which they all just kind of accept. At some point, there's a motel and a creepy Eastern European janitor with a Walkman. It's super weird, but in a good way. Also, there's a really cool trippy fight near the end with some sweet rock music and tons of explosions and stuff, which kind of made playing the game worth it all by itself. On the next episode of James Loves Games, get ready for the thrilling conclusion of James's 2022 game rankings. Which games make it into the top 10? Will Elden Ring manage to clinch the top spot? And just who is this mysterious medieval moron? All of these questions and more will be answered on the next episode of James Loves Games.